Well, it's been a while since I have made any kind of video, but I did want to make a video to talk about the last video I uploaded. Last video I uploaded was a little more than a week ago, and it was a news report on, it was an old one, 3 years ago, on the Pizzagate, the comic ping pong, and the news reporter got fired the day of making the report, but he was reporting on, the many creepy little evidence that there was something going on with that pizza place and the owner, James Elephantis. And so YouTube took that video down, gave me a strike, and I couldn't make any videos or save anything to my playlist, accusing me of bullying and harassing. So I guess so much for freedom of speech. But anyways, other things, I've been wanting to read a little bit on some stuff that I found here. I guess I will see what happens after the making of this video. People keep making the argument as if we can trust our government, right? My last video before this one is showing a news report on the U.S. government, Army, secret chemical bioweapons testing on citizens, But, they act like as if you're the bad guy for talking about this latest scam, tyranny scam, as I would call it. They treat you like, how dare you question, right? Well, I have an argument for them. If I had a history of lying, doing very evil things, being caught doing it, would you ever trust me again? It's the same thing with our government. Like, here, this is an article, wariscrime.com. 13 most evil U.S. government human experiments. Robert Wabash. This was several years ago, almost 8 years ago. Yeah, no. The U.S. government has been caught conducting an insane amount of vile, inhumane, and grisly experiments on humans without their consent and often without their knowledge. So in light of recent news of the U.S. infecting Guatemalans with STDs, here are the 13 most evil, for lack of a better word, cases of human testing as conducted by the United States of America. Get ready to become one of those conspiracy theory nuts, because after this list, you will never fully trust your government again. Oh, but, they expect us to continue trusting them, so don't worry. A lot of people still evidently fully trust the government. Of course, Project MKUltra, Subproject 68. The CIA ran Project MKUltra, paid by Dr. Donald Ewen Cameron, for Subproject 68. That's Dr. Ewen Cameron. Sorry. Which would be experiments involving mind-altering substances. The entire goal of the project was to probe examination into methods of influencing and controlling the mind and being able to extract information from resisting minds. So, in order to accomplish this, the doctor took patients admitted to his Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal and conducted therapy on them. The patients were mostly taken in for issues like bipolar depression and anxiety disorders. The treatment they received was life-altering and scarring. In the period he was paid for, from the 1957 to 1964, Ewen Cameron administered electroconvulsive therapy at 30 to 40 times the normal power. He would put patients into a drug-induced coma for months on end and play back tapes of simple statements or repetitive noises over and over again. The victims forgot how to talk, forgot about their parents, and suffered serious amnesia. And all of this was performed on Canadian citizens because the CIA, criminals in action, wasn't willing to risk such operations on Americans. To ensure that the project remained funded, Ewan Cameron, in one scheme, took his experiments upon admitted children, and in one situation had the child engage in sex with high-ranking government officials and film it. He and other MKUltra officers would blackmail the officials to ensure more funding. Yep, and people, these idiots that are just, every time you try to talk to people about the facts, how they, all this official narrative on the virus doesn't add up. Clearly a plan to bring in total tyranny, and they scoff at that as if the government would never think of something so evil. Well, that's one. Another example is the mustard gas tested on soldiers via involuntary gas chambers. As bioweapon research intensified in the 1940s, officials also began testing its repercussions and defenses on the Army itself. In order to test the effectiveness of various bioweapons, officials were known to have sprayed mustard gas and other skin-burning, lung-ruining chemicals like lewisite, spelled Lewisite, lewisite, on soldiers without their consent or knowledge of the experiment happening to them. They also tested the effectiveness of gas masks and protective clothing by locking soldiers in a gas chamber and exposing them to mustard gas and lewisite, evoking the gas chamber image of Nazi Germany. Effects of lewisite. Lewisite is a gas that can easily penetrate clothing and even rubber. Upon contact with the skin, the gas immediately causes extreme pain, itching, swelling, and even a rash. Large, fluid-filled blisters develop 12 hours after exposure in the form of intensely severe chemical burns, and that's just skin contact with the gas. Inhaling of the gas causes a burning pain in the lungs, sneezing, vomiting, and pulmonary edema. Symptomless until about 24 hours after exposure, mustard gas has mutagenic and carcinogenic properties that have killed many subjected to it. Its primary effects include severe burns that turn into yellow fluid-leaking boils over a period of time. Although treatment is available, mustard gas burns heal very, very slowly and are extremely painful. The burn the gas leaves in the skin are sometimes irreparable. It's also rumored that along with the soldiers, patients at VA hospitals were being used as guinea pigs for medical experiments involving biowarfare chemicals. That all experiments were changed to be known as observations to ward off suspicions. A third example, U.S. grants immunity to involuntary surgery monster. As head of Japan's infamous Unit 731, a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II, Dr. Shiro Ishii, that's spelled Shiro, S-H-I-R-O, Ishii, spelled I-S-H-I-I, head of medicine, carried out violent human experimentation of tens of thousands during the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II. Ishii was responsible for testing vivisection techniques without any anesthesia on human prisoners. For the uninitiated, vivisection is the act of conducting experimental surgery on living creatures with central nervousness and examining their insides for scientific purposes. So basically, he was giving unnecessary surgery to prisoners by opening them all the way up, keeping them alive, and not using any anesthetic. Evil. Absolute evil. During these experiments, he would also force pregnant women to abort their babies. He also played God by subjecting his prisoners to change in physiological conditions and inducing strokes, heart attacks, frostbite, hyperthermia. Ishii considered these subjects, quote-unquote, logs. Following imminent defeat in 1945, Japan blew up the Unity 731 complex, and Ishii ordered all the remaining logs to be executed. Not soon after, Ishii was arrested, and then the respected General Douglas MacArthur allegedly struck a deal with Ishii. If the U.S. granted Ishii immunity from his crimes, he must exchange all germ warfare data based on human experimentation. So Ishii got away with his crimes because the U.S. became interested in the results of his research. While not directly responsible for these acts, the actions of the American government certainly illustrated it was more than willing to condone human torture for advancements in biological warfare that could kill even more people. Not a surprise, considering its past resume, Ishii remained alive until 1959, performing research into bioweaponry and probably thinking up more plans to annihilate people in different Dr. Giggles-esque ways to his dying day. So, yeah, isn't that nice? So, people have this naive idea that people like me should just shut up and just roll up the sleeve and take their garbage, chemical poison, God knows what's in it, vaccine. Without question. Because, Bill Gates and all those, globalist scumbags tell us to. And yet, the government has a history of doing all these unethical, evil things. Yeah. Another example. Deadly chemical sprays on American cities. Showing once again that the U.S. always tends to test out worst-case scenarios by getting to them first, and with the advent of biochemical warfare in the mid-20th century, the Army, CIA, and government conducted a series of warfare simulations upon American cities to see how the effects would play out in the event of an actual chemical attack. They conducted the following airstrikes, naval attacks. The CIA released a whooping cough virus on Tampa Bay using boats, and so caused the whooping cough epidemic. 12 people died. Let that register in your brain. The CIA caused a whooping cough epidemic. Doesn't ever occur to anybody at all that, let's just say this is as real as they're saying it is. I mean, you think that they wouldn't, do you think it's impossible? It's just a, outrageous conspiracy theory to say that they helped create this epidemic as well, as considering their history? The Navy sprayed San Francisco with bacterial pathogens, and in consequence, many citizens developed pneumonia. Upon Savannah, Georgia, and Avon Park, Florida, the Army released millions of mosquitoes in the hopes they would spread yellow fever and dengue fever. Dengue, I think I might be pronouncing that wrong. I haven't heard of that before. Dengue fever. D-E-N-G-U-E, dengue fever. The swarm left Americans struggling with fevers, typhoid, respiratory problems, and the worst, stillborn children. Still trust them? Even worse was that after the swarm, the Army came in disguised as public health workers. Gee, isn't that nice? Their secret intention the entire time they were giving aid to the victims was to study and chart out the long-term effects of all the illnesses they were suffering. Doesn't that just give you a nice warm feeling about our government? U.S. infects, and I was just talked about, U.S. infects Guatemalans with STDs. In the 1940s, with penicillin as an established cure for syphilis, the U.S. decided to test out its effectiveness on Guatemalan citizens. To do this, they used infected prostitutes and let them loose on unknowing prison inmates, insane asylum patients, and soldiers. When spreading the disease through prostitution didn't work as well as they hoped, they instead went for the inoculation route. Researchers poured syphilis bacteria onto men's penises and on their forearms and faces. In some cases, they even inoculated the men through spinal punctures. After all the infections were transmitted, researchers then gave most of the subjects treatment, although as many as 1/3 of them could have been left untreated, even if that was the intention of the study in the first place. On October 1st, 2010, Hillary Clinton apologized for the events, and new research has gone on to see if anyone affected is still alive and afflicted with syphilis. Since many subjects never got penicillin, it's possible and likely that someone spread it to future generations. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Roll up the sleeves, guys. You can trust the loving government. Human experiments to test the effects of the atomic bomb. While testing out and trying to harness the power of the atomic bomb, U.S. scientists also secretly tested the bomb's effects on humans. During the Manhattan Project, which gave way to the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, U.S. scientists resorted to secret human testing via plutonium injection on 18 unsuspecting, non-consenting patients. This included injecting soldiers with micrograms of plutonium for Project Oak Ridge, along with later injecting 3 patients at a Chicago hospital. Imagine you're an admitted patient, helpless in a hospital bed, assuming that nothing is wrong when the government suddenly appears and puts weapons-grade plutonium in your blood. Out of the 18 patients, who were known only by their code names and numbers at the time, only 5 lived longer than 20 years after injection. Along with plutonium, researchers also had fun with uranium. At a Massachusetts hospital between 1946 and 1947, Dr. William Sweet injected patients with uranium. He was funded by the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project, interestingly, was something that was cooped up at a meeting at the Bohemia Grove, that little satanic little festival that these elitist pigs like to attend in, Sonoma County in Northern California. In the exchange for the uranium he received from the government, he would keep dead tissue from the body of the people he killed for scientific analysis on the effects of uranium exposure. I mean, this keeps going on. I'm already almost at 20 minutes here, and it just goes on. I mean, after knowing all about this, how can these people be so sheep-like? This is not bullying and harassing. This is facts. If I had did one of these things, I would be in prison for life. Or on death row. Never to be trusted ever again. And yet, over and over and over, they do this sick, evil stuff on us. And the sheeple continue to lap up their lies, roll up their sleeves, and think that the government loves them. Injecting prisoners with Agent Orange. There's a video that was on this paper that I printed out. Maybe I might take a look at that. I didn't. I just printed this off. But if I find that video, and it's on YouTube, and I'll see if I can upload it and post it on my channel here. While he received funding from the Agent Orange producing Dow Chemical Company, the U.S. Army and Johnson & Johnson and Dr. Albert Kliegman used prisoners as subjects in what was deemed, quote, dermatological research, unquote. The dermatology aspect was testing out products, the effect of Agent Orange on the skin. Needless to say, the injecting of or exposure to dioxin is beyond monstrous to voluntarily do to any human. Kligman, though, injected dioxin, the main component of Agent Orange, into the prisoners to study its effects. What did happen was that the prisoners developed an eruption of chloracne, or whatever. All that stuff from high school combined with blackheads and cysts and pustules that look like the picture shown to the left that develop on the cheeks, behind the ears, armpits, and the groin. Yes, the groin. Kligman was rumored to have injected 468 times the amount he was authorized to. Documentation of that effect has, wisely, not been distributed. The Army oversaw while Kligman continued to test out skin-burning chemicals to, in their own words, learn how the skin protects itself against chronic assault from toxic chemicals, the so-called hardening process, and test out many products whose effects were unknown at the time, but with the intent of figuring that out. During these proceedings, Kligman was reported to have said, quote, "All I saw before me were acres of skin. It was like a farmer seeing a fertile field for the first time," unquote. Using that analogy, it's easy to see how he could plow straight through so many human subjects without any ounce of sympathy. And of course, he names another one, Operation Paperclip. The U.S. secretly pardoning and taking in Nazi scientists and giving them American identities. But I don't need to go too much over that one because a lot of us know that one. Infecting Puerto Rico with cancer. In 1931, Dr. Cornelius, that's right, Cornelius Rhodes, was sponsored by the Rockefeller Institute to conduct experiments in Puerto Rico. He infected Puerto Rican citizens with cancer cells, presumably to study the effects. 13 of them died. What's most striking is that the accusations stem from a note he allegedly wrote, quote, "The Puerto Ricans are the dirtiest, laziest, most degenerate and thievish race of men ever to inhabit this sphere. I have done my best to further the process of extermination by killing off 8 and transplanting cancer into several more. All physicians take delight in the abuse and torture of the unfortunate subjects," unquote. And, I don't know if that, I guess I would have to look up to see the legitimacy of that quote, but I wouldn't put it past them guys to think that way because we have, Ted Turner saying that, we need to stabilize the population, a lot of useless eaters. We have Bill Gates who, at the TED conference saying that, what he said, what you all know he said, and lowering the population to near zero. And we're David Rockefeller. And you have, who was the one who was Obama's science advisor, did the eco-science book. Can't think of his name. Eco-science. John P. Holdren. And he writes some stuff in the book about, using water as a sterilant and poisoning our food and water to, to kill us off, whatever. But, so I wouldn't, it does sound like them, but, again, you have example after example, case after case of them doing stuff that if we had done even one of these, we would be locked away. It would somewhere we would have been locked away in hell with them throwing away the key. So, Pentagon treats black cancer patients with extreme radiation. In the 1960s, the Department of Defense performed a series of irradiation experiments on non-consenting poor African American cancer patients. They were told they would be receiving treatment, but they weren't told it would be the Pentagon type of treatment, meaning to study the effects of high-level radiation on the human body. To avoid litigation, forms were signed only with initials so that the patients would have no way to get back at the government. And what's interesting about with the new vaccines, all these pharmaceutical companies and Bill Gates with their vaccines and stuff, they always have sort of make sure that they protect themselves from getting sued. There's an executive order, I don't remember, but it was passed that actually protects many of these pharmaceutical companies from any kind of lawsuit if one of these vaccines, does have a negative fatal effect on somebody who receives it. So why do you think, why do that if they're so safe? But anyways. To avoid litigation, forms are signed. Okay, I'm already here. In a similar case, Dr. Eugene Segner, funded by the Defense Atomic Support Agency, conducted the same procedure on the same type of patients. The poor black Americans received about the same level of radiation as 7,500 x-rays to their chest would, which caused intense pain, vomiting, bleeding from their nose and ears. At least 20 of the subjects died. Operation Midnight Climax. Operation Midnight Climax involves safe houses in New York and San Francisco built for the sole purpose to study LSD effects on non-consenting individuals. But in order to lure the individuals there, the CIA, or Criminals in Action, made these safe houses out to be, wait for it, brothels, prostitutes on the CIA payroll. Yes, there was such a thing, lured clients back to the houses. Instead of having sex with them, though, they dosed them with a number of substances, most famously LSD. This also involved extensive use of marijuana. The experiments were monitored behind a two-way mirror, kind of like a sick, twisted peep show. Furthermore, it's alleged that the officials who ran the experiments described them as, quote, "It was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, steal, cheat, rape, and pillage with the sanction and bidding of the all-highest," unquote. Isn't that just so wonderful? The most horrifying part was the idea of dosing non-consenting adults with drugs they couldn't possibly know the effects of. I mean, okay, fallout radiation on unsuspecting Pacific territories. After unleashing hell upon Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the United States embarked on numerous thermonuclear bomb tests in the Pacific in response to increased Soviet bomb activity. They were intended to be a secret affair. However, this secrecy would fail. Detonated in 1954 over Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands, Castle Bravo was the most powerful nuclear device the U.S. ever set off. What they didn't expect was for the fallout from the blast to inadvertently be blown upwind on nearby residents of other islands. The suffering included birth defects and radiation sickness. The effects were greater felt in later years when many children whose parents were exposed to the fallout developed thyroid cancer and neoplasms. This created Project 4.1, a study to examine the effects of radiation fallout on human beings. Essentially, it was the latest in a string of studies where humans act as guinea pigs without giving consent, in a project remembered by the U.S. as a way to gather data that would otherwise be unobtainable. The U.S. moral standard that history best remembers is that even though the radiation fallout on the people of the Marshall Islands was an accident, it might as well have been intended. In addition, perhaps as nature's way of adding insult to injury, a Japanese fishing boat was caught in the fallout. The fishermen all fell ill and one died, making the Japanese livid that the U.S. was still affecting them with nuclear devices. Then, of course, you have the Tuskegee syphilis experiments in Alabama. This is the 13th, example that I'm giving on why we should not trust the government. The recent uncovering of the U.S. exposing Guatemalans to syphilis brings back to mind this infamous study. In between 1932 and 1972, that's 40 years, people, researchers recruited 400 black sharecroppers in Tuskegee, Alabama to study the natural progression of syphilis. But the scientists never told the men they had syphilis. Instead, they went around believing that they were being treated for bad blood disease as researchers used them to find out the extent of syphilis symptoms and effects. In 1947, penicillin became the standard cure for syphilis, but along with withholding information about the disease, scientists also forgot to tell their subjects that what they were being treated for had a cure. And so the study continued for nearly 30 years or more. And I'm sure, just forgot. Once it was discovered, the backlash to the study was so fierce that President Bill Clinton made a formal apology. I'm sure he was so sorry, him being one of them. stating he was sorry that the government orchestrated a study that was so racist. Sadly enough, it would be horrific, but one of the more docile, evil human experiments ever conducted by the U.S. government. And that's it for now. And apparently quickly on this headline, Army conducted 239 secret open-air germ warfare tests. Still trust the government? This is proof right here that trusting the government should be the last thing we should do. And rolling up your sleeve, the last thing you should do, especially since it was not even approved. And it's an experimental vaccine with all kinds of, very scary kind of chemicals in it. Well, thank you for listening and watching. Take care. Good night. And I hope they don't take this video down. I really hope they don't.